So, the goddess. 52 goddess myths, 52 more than 52 paper cuts with my long-term collaborator Sophie.
Oh, I'll stand up as well. I like standing
Yes,
up.
stand up.
Nice.
Sophie. And I'm just going to show them. This is our first book that we did together, Amazing Maidens, and we've done 5 books. They're all for kids, most of them, but now we've made one for adults at last. And in fact, the story of Sedna is in the book.
That's true.
Can you find that illustration?
That might be a slight challenge, but
Okay.
I've seen it earlier.
But it's retold with
Actually,
the bits cut out of it that should.
This is part of the Sedna story, but it isn't in the book. So
That's beautiful.
It's a little
Why isn't
outtake.
it in the book? Yeah.
Because I tried to only let one paper cut go with each story, and I had done about 4 for Sedna because I'm so used to the story. So naturally there were 3 outtakes. Sedna could really do with this comb.
Yes.
And if you were going to hear the story, you'd know why.
The chapters, the book is divided into 6 chapters, and it kind of tells the life of the goddess from creator to crone, or birth to death, and it's her life and it's our life. And then in between there is virgin, then warrior, then lover, then mother, and crone. But it's quite difficult to really put a goddess into a category. In fact, they all overlap, and virgins are warriors rattling their spears and drinking blood, and warriors are lovers, and lovers are virgins, and virgins are mothers, and mothers are crones, and crones are creators, and creators, and so on. So they're all kind of merge one to the next, and they've got many, many different aspects. And the other thing I'd like to say is that they're not just for girls and women. They are for everybody. The goddess is for everybody, and sometimes she's about love, often she's about righteous rage. She is about transformation, she's about making things, and in the case of Cybele, there are no pronouns, and Cybele fathers a child. So the goddess encompasses everything. Will you show us a few pictures, sir?
Yeah, okay, so the process,
Tell us a bit,
yeah,
yes.
the process of working with these stories is amazing too, because Pomme has, dug around to find quite a lot of these stories from scraps, little textile scraps, enormous epics, all kinds of places where the goddess lurks, but she isn't necessarily centre stage. So there's been a real way of finding these characters and also their props, because I didn't want to cut out portraits of goddesses. I wanted to make reference points so that the reader was able to pick up a prop of the goddess and use it themselves. And in some ways, that's why we don't see Durga, but we can take a ride on Durga's tiger. Or we don't see Isis, but we can see elements of the story of Isis and where she rescued this baby from the scorpion in the story, who was part of her scorpion army anyway. And then quite a lot of them, but then some of them I did want to depict, like this is Lilith in one of her incarnations, where she's actually living in a kind of very peaceable way. Lilith isn't always a peaceful character. She's got all kinds of aspects, quite fiery. Hello, Kerry. Do take a seat. I'm just going on about Lilith. Hello. So it was really wonderful for me. I'm also a poet, and to inhabit these goddesses from a kind of metaphorical and poetic angle, as generating like objects and things to go with them, felt very like the right way to work, but also going back to their source material. So of course it was intimidating making paper cuts of people like Isis, because there's so much beautiful Egyptian imagery that was just a replica. So I went into the imagery of ancient Egypt, and in order to get myself into being able to cut out Isis and Osiris, I am afraid I had to resort to finding a page in an old book called Collectible Spoons. And somehow by cutting them out of some collectible spoons, it reduced them to a scale by which I could relate to them. And
gives them a lovely texture.
It does give them a lovely texture, that's also the bonus. I mean, it's lovely working with tone, and tone is something that in paper cuts, I think, it just helps break up that relentless silhouette. So you can see with Lilith giving birth to demons in another incarnation of Lilith, I've used an index from an atlas to give these demons their sort of repetitive typography. You'll know about those sorts of demons that live at the last pages of atlases. That's enough for me because it's a very short evening.
I think that the images create a sort of rhythm in the book and space that's quite poetic and allows you, almost like a shrine, there's the real one, allows you a bit of space to, not the real one, the printed one, the one in the book, there's the real one, allows you space to dream, to have your own thoughts, like a pause of music or something. It you know, they're given a lot of space in the book, and I think that's really beautiful.
We were very excited. We
Yeah.
worked very, very closely together,
Yes.
page by page, to
Yes.
make sure that each drawing or paper cut had its own space. Because
Yes.
quite often with I mean, that's a whole other story of how a book appears in print and the process of getting it ready for publication and how you have to stand your ground to make sure that everything, the text has the right space, the images have the right space, that the images and text respect each other inside the book so that you're not just falling over everything. And you can't do that with a goddess. You can't do it with a story or the pictures. You can't be in an undignified shuffle with them, can you? They need loads of air because they're magic.
Yes, and myths are, I mean, the book is focused on myth, and so I think that's quite, you know, how do you define a myth? But it's, for me, it's not a fairy tale. And so there are some fairy tale characters, like Baba Yaga, for instance, who is not a goddess. She wasn't worshipped in that way. Maybe by a few people, I'm not really sure, but she doesn't take place in the book because the stories in which she appears are fairy tales, and fairy tales have got a particular structure, and this structure is not the same as myth. So a fairy tale structure is repeating threes, it's a quest, it's a journey, it's got a beginning, a middle, and end. It's some kind of transformation as well. And myth is much more radical. It doesn't have a beginning or an end. It's like a massive family tree that just goes back and back and back. There are many backstories and backstories and backstories, and there are different versions of it as well. Some of them written down, some of them depicted on paintings and so on. So it's, for me as the writer, trying to find the structure of each of those stories and where to start and where to end and how to give the sense of myth is part of the space in the book and the way that it's laid out and part of the way that it's got its relationships with the images as well.
Great.
Yes,
There goes Mary.
There's Mary.
There's a book.
Shall I tell them a little story?
Tell them
Do you
a
think
story.
that's a good idea?
I do.
Did you want to say anything after that?
No.
Okay. So I'll tell you a little story. This is in fact the first story in the book. In the very beginning, there was nothing. Just dark sky and dark sea. Endless black sky and endless dark sea. There was no light, no land. And there was one girl, just one girl all alone. Maiden of the air, Ilmata, heiress, the wide wandering goddess. She floated in the sky, drifting to and fro, floating in the endless spacious fields of air. But in time, she got bored. She was lonely. She was all alone, and there was nowhere to rest her feet. So Ilmata, heiress, swooped down onto the billows. She swam to and fro on the vast, endless, rolling sea, and still there was nowhere to rest her feet. When a wind came, a hot wind, a lusty wind, the wind splashed up the billows. It made a froth around Ilmata. It rocked the maiden to and fro. The wind wrapped itself around her, caught her tight. The wind squeezed her. The wind rocked the girl. The wind kept rocking the girl. The wind blew through her. The wind blew into her. The wind blew the maiden of the air pregnant. Maiden of the air became mother of the water, and she started swimming about looking for land. She swam north, swam south, swam east, swam west. There was no land, not even the poorest kind of place to give birth. Nothing, nowhere for the wide wandering goddess to rest. She swam, carrying her baby for a long time, a very long time, for 700 years. For 700 years the baby was not born. And then a little bird came. It fluttered about. It was looking for land, looking for a place to rest, looking for somewhere to build its nest. The bird flew north, south, east, west. There wasn't even the poorest kind of place. There was nowhere to rest. There was nowhere to build a nest. The mother of the water looked, and she knew just how that bird felt. And so she raised her knee up out of the sea. And the little bird saw something. The little bird thought it was a grassy hillock, a green tussock. The bird swooped down and landed on Ilmata's knee. The bird pulled hair from heiress's head, long hair from the wide wandering goddess, and twirled it into a nest. The bird laid an egg on the goddess's knee, a golden egg. The bird sat on the egg. The bird brooded the egg. The bird warmed the egg, turned the egg. The egg grew hot. The egg grew very, very hot. And the wide wandering goddess, she felt her knee was burning. She felt her skin scorching. She felt her bones boiling. She felt her marrow melting. She could not help herself. She twitched her knee, and the golden egg tumbled from her knee. The golden egg splashed into the sea. The golden egg broke into bits and turned into fine things, beautiful things. The universe tumbled out. The golden eggshell became the land, our earth. Did you know you were sitting on an eggshell? The golden yolk became our sun, glowing in the sky. The white gleamed palely as the moon. The speckles on the egg became the stars. The spots on the egg became our clouds. And so the world was made. Land and light had come into being. The mother of the water pulled herself up onto dry land. At last, there was a place to rest. At last, there was a place to give birth. The wide, wandering goddess had found a home. And we are all heirs of heiress and that very first egg. Have you got that, so?
Probably.
I show them in the book.
Yeah, show them in the book.
Okay.
I'm going to read a couple of poems.
I was going to say that
Oh, yeah.
Sophie and I, you know, we've loved female characters, and all of our work, all of our collections have been about female heroines from fairy tales and myths and folk tales. And we have explored that theme for me in performance as well as writing, and for Sophie in poetry as well as painting and collaborations, both of us with other artists. So there is the wide wandering goddess with
Her knee.
the bird.
I mean,
on the
actually, that
knee.
was one of the first. I don't normally, when I'm making pictures for a book, I don't normally do them in the right order, because otherwise you could see how I was getting more and more into it, and by the end it would suddenly look really good. So I try to start in the middle and go sideways, or just start with one story and then go to another story, to try and not make things consistent. Or to, you know, because I think consistency is overrated and also impossible. So for those reasons, I can't do it. But that
It's
one.
a good idea.
That one I did start with, and so it is rather fiddly, because when you're finding a voice for a book, it often starts off a little hesitant. Now, this is a poem. I'm just going to read about 3 poems because we haven't got much time. This is a poem inspired by a story I read that Pomme wrote. So she wrote a story about this goddess Tiamat, or Tiamat. I don't know how you say Tiamat.
How
Who
would
knows?
you pronounce it? Rhea.
Unfortunately, I'm not 3,000 years old.
Yes.
but-
You look lovely. I think you, if you
But
are,
Rhea
you're
is
doing a
in
really
that
good job.
area,
Yeah,
yeah.
they call it Tiamat.
Okay.
Tiamat.
Yeah.
You were really right, Sophie. You're better than
were.
me. You were good.
Anyway, I had no visual reference for her.
I don't think anybody did.
No. So she's an ancient Babylonian goddess with no visual reference.
Exactly. No.
But she's continually giving birth to demons, which I find impressive. And this is my paper cut of her with her long eyelashes continually giving birth to demons. And you can see them all. She's got kind of rotating boobs in my picture so that she can constantly suckle all the little demons as they come out of her various holes. She's giving birth to them from all the holes. Bless her heart. In the end, she's so much trouble that one of her offspring has to, murder her, which is, only to be expected. So, this poem is inspired by her. Tiamat, whose name I can't say, purrs voluptuous in magnolia skins, like a leopard, only more so, like a snake, only more so. Scaly monster of the deep, she's vast in tattooed cuneiform. Mother, monster, bolster, mobster. She breathes out demon babies just like that. Millions of demon babies, they scuttle off. Copper beetles, weevils, one-eyed does and shrews, onto the land, creating the land. She squeezes out dirty great hawks too. Rooks, gulls with human legs, that flap and heave, into the sky, creating the sky. They prise open its sealed cloud with huge cantilevered wings. The puddles hesitate, then crack. It's the strain of having something new to reflect. Tiamat rolls over, makes thunder. None of this world would exist without her demonic capacity. Bench, mood, hedge, branch, loom, dusk. Inventions slide from her slime, her drive, her underwater indolence. We descend from her. I do. You do. Our demon children go out, get jobs, roll their prehistoric eyes, yawn as they pick their way, hungry, through her very trying suburban avenues. We hide our scales under T-shirts. We pretend creativity isn't all we've got. Could our monstrosity be more obvious?
Woo!
Thank you. Cheers. And then I've got one about Mary, who's like an amazing mother goddess, obviously, that you will all be familiar with. I don't know if I've got Mary handy.
I'll show her.
Okay, she's here in her original form. Well, no, her strictly original form.
Here she is.
One of her forms.
She's beautiful.
I've got a very short Mary poem, if I can find it. I did have them all in a pile, didn't I? Nicely. So this Mary that I've written, I wrote a while ago. I wrote in Venice when I was doing a residency there, which was a printmaking residency. It was quite a Jewish residency, because I am Jewish and I get dragged into these quite Jewy jobs. And nonetheless, I managed to go and look at tissue. Mary's everywhere. In Italy, obviously, she's above every building, in every corner. And it's quite an interesting thing, isn't it, having a kind of dominant culture that you get very used to. And so you kind of take her for granted that she's everywhere. But she's particularly everywhere in Renaissance paintings, and I love a lot of those. And so I went into one of the very beautiful churches in Venice, and I saw Titian's painting of Mary. Titian is one of my favourite painters. But this painting had been restored a lot, so you'll hear. It's a short little poem. Titian's Mary, blisters in scarlet over the grand altar, paint restored to the sheen and impregnability of a table mat. This cleanliness dents her vivacity, wipes flat centuries of supplication, but it doesn't dampen her power. Power you can walk away from, but it still burns into you, like everything a mother says. And it's a shame to only have time for one more, but that's the trouble with today. And I'm going to give you a choice. What do you think, Artemisia or God's Cloak?
Artemisia is connected to Titian, isn't it?
Yeah, it is connected to Titian, so you're going to get 2 Titians for the price of one, which is always a bargain. Seeking Artemisia, and also Artemisia Gentileschi, who was an amazing Italian Renaissance painter, the only female painter that any of us really, well, you know. I was making a pilgrimage when I was young to go and find her work. Seeking Artemisia. Once I've shucked to the vast museum through poky acres of parched grass, seen the bus part its own dust back to Napoli, read the sign on the huge doors, Chioso per restauro. Once I've banged the "you are kidding" out of that massive door, broken down on security, and gestured in unhinged mascara that this is a very real emergency, I'm given the shrug and the run of that boarded up palace. I turn a corner and am face to face with her Judith. Her 17th century paint slicks dents in shades of blood and coal. Judith, locked to her task in perpetuity, saws head from torso. Lucretia's pale as fury too, dagger raised, lips tight, old white breasts like yesterday's bread. I straighten up in my jumble sail dress and try to learn. Artemisia, give me a sign. Am I an artist? The women are silent. They maintain distance, dazzle. They're in mid-sleigh. I remain nobody. My eyes hurt from making a scene. I do that slow museum walk, sober, intrepid, like a spaceman, through the faded, grand rooms as they open out, worn parquet floors, ceilings indented sugarcraft, walls upholstered in wadded silk, grazed and frayed to shreds. I can see why the place is closed. It's falling to bits. That old olive silk. Its pitiful decay so intimate. I lean on its rot to sympathise, to cool my head. From a corner in the furthest room, a girl blinks from a small gold frame. She's painted by Titian. She's young like me. She gives me a half smile. She shakes her hair loose, or maybe it's her loose paintwork. She wears a frank, unvarnished look, outshines her cumbersome pearls. Never have I encountered a person more alive. Ah, so it was you I came to meet. She nods. At last she's not alone. Chat.
And I just wondered whether you could tell us about this paper cut. So
I've got that original somewhere,
Yes,
that's what I was
yes.
looking for. But maybe better...
just tell us about that.
So this paper cut, those of you that are also Titian fans might recognise that I've stolen this from the one in the National Gallery, because it's the story of where Actaeon is turned into a stag and his hounds eat him. It's very vicious. And when I was reading the story over and over again, I kind of wanted to see that moment. How does it look when a man turns into a stag in the woods? That's also quite an interesting question, isn't it? And also, how does it feel for that man being eaten by his own dogs? Another quite spooky question. And so I didn't
Poor
immediately
man.
think of Titian, but he's obviously never far from my mind. So there's a painting in the National Gallery where Diana's loosing her arrow, and there is Actaeon turning into the stag, and it's quite blurry. Tom and I, we went to look at it, didn't we, recently, or after I'd done this, and it has this kind of aliveness, this feeling that you can actually look into the paint and see something happening, a transformation. And I love that idea that before your very eyes, something really weird is going on. And to try and catch it in something as stiff as a paper cut, for me, is also a fun challenge, a kind of intriguing idea that you could move from that blurry paintwork where anything could happen, because a lot of it is blurred, to something where there's certainty, like a knife through paper. And so maybe that's...
But is it the angle as well? It's something about the angle.
It's the feeling of him falling, I guess, and the feeling that he's out of control. And in a way, I suppose that's what I mean about the medium. So to use something very controlled like a knife to cut out a shape that is a bit out of control, there's something playful in that I could get into. Is that our chat? No, we've got to have other chats.
Well, you could ask me a question.
I could ask you a question. I could
Got
try.
any questions, darling?
Well, I would like to ask you, I suppose...
Jing, jing.
yeah, no, my poor brain.
I'll just say
Do you want to
something.
ask yourself
I'll ask
a question?
myself a question.
That's awful.
How did you write these stories?
Well, how did you begin to feel that you could write down such enormous stories, and did it take you a really long time? Because they're so big. And which goddesses took over your brain and which goddesses left you alone?
I mean, all the goddesses, each one took over my brain, and I wanted them to live, and I wanted them to live in a new way as they were inside me. And so I never knew whether I was going to tell it, how I was going to tell it. I never knew if I was going to tell it in the first person or the third person. The voice would appear. And also I was quite radical. So some of these stories have got a lot of men in them. And I just pushed the men to one side. They were, their roles were reduced. And they really were, because I felt like a lot of the stories, the versions that you can read, are from their point of view, and the men have got the major role, but actually the goddess is very important, but it's quite small. And so I kind of shifted things around and started the myth in a different place and started it with them. And yeah, I think that's what makes the book different. And then it's got a lovely bibliography at the back where you can go and find an extended version with the bits that are missing if you want to. For instance, the story of Arianrod, so there's the bibliography. The story of Arianrod, which has got a lot of male characters, and her part in it is important, but it's not the main thing. And yet her rage and her outrage as well about what happens to her is actually a very, very big motivation throughout it. So I wanted to tell it from their points of view. Any questions?
Yeah.
Yes. We'll ask your question.
Where did you find the goddess stories from different areas of the world?
Yes, they're from, I mean, not every single part of the world, but a lot of the world. I tried to get, all continents. Not everything is represented, but a lot of the world is represented. Some of it is quite small and it just gives you a taste into something. I think the other thing that I found was that if the goddess is part of a pantheon, that means it's part of a family of gods, like Greek, for instance, or Egyptian, a big family tree of gods, there's much more text that exists. If the goddess is more a household goddess and would have a sort of little local shrine, maybe is something more connected to nature, to the landscape, then there was less text that had been written down. So it was probably still going on orally. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Hello.
Was the one goddess that was most influential? I mean, were they all influencing you, or was there one in particular that was the most influential?
I mean, honestly, I loved all of them. When I wrote all of them, I loved all of them, and they took me over, and I felt I lived them. What about you, Soph?
Yeah, I found it really exciting because some of them would give you a little shock.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting when you're
Yes.
reading. You feel like you're reading a story and you're like, no! You know, with something that's like 3,000 years old and you go, oh, you can't do that!
Yeah.
And then you think, well, that's in the story and it's a really old story.
Yes.
And we're not used to that because we're often working with kind sanitised stories, even if it's on the news. Do you know what I mean? So in reality, disgusting though it is full of logic, and the myth overturns that and gives you a different logic and a really useful perspective into, you know, a universal mind that goes back in time that we can all share. So for me, the stories had this kind of surprise in them that was to do with power and a different way of looking.
I think the other thing that I wanted to do with the book is with the global goddesses was to there are many parallels between these myths. So there's similar images, there's similar bits of narrative, there's similar narrative arcs, and these images that keep coming back. So I want the reader to feel connected across the world. I want them to kind of keep feeling part of this bigger mind that I don't know where these stories have come from, but they reflect human preoccupations, human similarities. They connect us all. And so they make the world much smaller, and they make time much smaller as well.
Do you find yourself tempted as storytellers and artists to take license with the original text, such as the Tiamat story or Il Matir from the Kalabala? Do you find, yeah, but however they want to pronounce it.
Yeah.
But do you find yourself struggling between remaining true to the original text, or then as, you know, tellers of how the mind works, being pulled towards your own
Good
personal
question.
Such a good
creativity?
question.
It's quite a rich question,
You
isn't it?
answer first,
Well,
Sophie.
I mean, I would say that subjectivity is essential when you're making things. You can't help it. None of us can help it. So I think we do very different jobs with the material that we've got, and that's one of the reasons we work together well. So I don't mind taking liberties, but often I'm not trying to show you something that is actually an ancient story, for example. I am telling a modern story using that as a vehicle. So that's a different thing.
I mean, I felt that I took a lot of liberties, but the liberties are within the boundaries of the myth itself. So it was a fine line, and I don't think I crossed that line. I think in some cases I don't know if I went far enough. I was really concerned with, like, there are some big myths in there, like Demeter and Persephone, Ishtar and Isis and Osiris, these like huge stories. And I really wanted them to have the truth of the original, but also they are retold by me. And I feel connected to all those storytellers. That's what they've always done. They've always remade it for each audience. So I'm thinking about you, and how do you feel about Persephone being abducted into the underworld? What do you feel about that? And then I look at Demeter and I find out that she was raped as well, and so her rage is what kind of propels her through that story. And I think that's new. That's my take on it, but it's actually there.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for a very interesting talk. I think it's got 52 different
Yes.
goddesses. If the book had been a bit longer,
Yes.
they have to get to 53.
Oh my
Who
goodness.
was the additional one?
There was there are so many that are not in there. There are so many. Well, Ceridwen, who is a Welsh goddess, with her magic cauldron. There are too many men in that story. That's why, and it's too big. That's why it didn't end up in there. Maybe Parvati doesn't really appear, but Kali does. Durga does. So Parvati's mentioned. But again, it was more about whether that goddess had a story rather than a role. Sometimes they have a role. Good question. Any more questions over there?
What is the name of the oldest goddess?
Oh, lovely.
Could it be Tiamat?
I think it probably is
Because she is
Tiamat.
very, very old.
Tiamat, who is a creator goddess. And actually I disagree with Sophie because she doesn't deserve to die. Unfortunately, her children do kill
I
her.
didn't say she deserved it. I said it just has she had it coming.
She did not have it coming. Her children, mob her, mobster. She's mobbed by her children. She does give birth to demons to try to punish them, and so they probably do have to kill her. But she becomes
We can argue about
she
slavery.
becomes the earth, and her eyes become the river Tigris and the river Euphrates, and she's still crying so that they can flow. So for me, she's still there, and
These are her.
I do love her
Look.
actually.
She's got these tears. She's got these very fancy Tigris
But
and Euphrates.
Can I
eyes.
just say that I think there are older goddesses, which is, those stone statues which are like 40,000 years old.
They're amazing.
And they are often, they have like a peg legs that go down into a peg, and then they have very bulbous breasts and belly. And I think that this peg was, to stick in the ground, maybe next to a woman giving birth or a woman dying. They were her friend and her protector. And they were in my mind all the time, and I have tried to tell that story, even though there isn't one.
And I wanted to do that on the cover, but I couldn't.
Yes.
I couldn't make it work. So
It's a beautiful cover.
thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody! There's so much to say. We'll go and do some book signing now. And thank you to Sarah and to
Watkins
Watkins
and to you for
the bookshop that is,
magic.
a brilliant magic place in our imaginations, and now we've actually entered it.
And also,
After
what
all
a
these
lovely
years.
audience you've all done.
Yes.
It's so hot down here, windowless, and you've all been such lovely listeners, and so many of you. It's really nice.
Can I just say that I am doing a performance of the book at the British Museum in November, and it's going to be a longer version of this, and we are going to do a slightly longer version at Chenna Books,
Yeah, in Lordship Lane in East Dulwich in September the something.
the 12th,
Is it?
and it's November the 19th at the British Museum.
So it could be a goddessy autumn if you
Yes,
if you
you want. Thank you so much.